recording.
What up, what up, what up, and welcome back to Pnoid News. Man, listen, I'm over here in the rhetoric server. Open letter to open-minded progressives from Mencius Mobug. I'll be honest with you, like I thought his voice is perfect for this, and I was like, dude, bro, would you please come read this for me? And he was like, I am honored, sir. I would be happy to do so. Right. So I immediately stood here and I was like, yeah, right. And so that's here we are now. I'm gonna put the link in the description to the rhetoric server. I will, stand here and put a link in the description to, Giovanni, so that you guys can reach out to him if you have any paid narrations that you want to do for him, because the dude does work, And also, while we're here, I want to also shout out my boy Paulie and my boy 2Ls is here. Say what up to two of you. Paulie, say hi. Are you not gonna say nothing now? That's how this works. You talk the whole time.
Your
Paulie.
microphone. We didn't hear you.
Yo, homie, man. I'm sorry, man, but we totally lost you there at the last 15
Yo, it's cool.
seconds.
It's cool. It's cool. It's cool. I got it though. We're good. We're good. We're good at the
Goddamn
moment.
YouTube,
I got you. All right. Anyway, right. So now, also the boy 2Ls is here, and you know what I'm saying. Giovanni's here. In the meantime, now, Giovanni, you ready to rock, my brother?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
All right. So you got the page loaded up. You ready to go?
I do.
All right.
Absolutely.
We're going to start from chapter 2 because chapter 1 is a lot of kind of like introductory type of stuff that I don't really feel like getting into. And chapter 2 kind of really gets into some stuff. So, that's where we're going to start at on this reading right here. All right, Mr. Giovanni, please take it away, sir.
I shall. In chapter 1, we looked at 3 anomalies in progressive political thought: a surprising definition of the word independence, an oscillatory ambivalence around the concept of nationalism, and a chiral gradient in sensitivity to human rights violations. These particular anomalies are not just progressive, they are in fact modern. They are generally shared across the conservative-progressive spectrum. They are even shared by most libertarians, except maybe by the Randians, whom have epistemic troubles of their own. They are simply as close to universal as it comes. Unless, of course, the past is allowed to dissent. Because when we look backward a little, we see these ideas come along quite recently. They are fresh, very fresh. To a progressive, of course, this is mere progress. But if you are also an evolutionary geneticist, you might also call it a selective sweep. Obviously, our anomalies have some competitive advantage. But what might that advantage be? Well, perhaps the anomalies have prevailed, because in some way that we maybe don't quite understand completely yet, they are good and sweet and true. After all, people would rather think thoughts that are good and sweet and true. They would also prefer to share such with their friends, because it is obvious, so elegant, and so widely believed will label this null hypothesis. I'm going to interrupt the discussion for a moment and digress, since this is, after all, the 21st century. Perhaps we can enliven our proceedings with a little mixed media. Yeah. As far as I can tell, no one is harmed in this 80-second clip, but otherwise it's as dramatic as it gets. It has a talky start, a shocking climax, and a happy ending. Well, it's sort of a happy ending, at least. The blue car gets away. By the way, I lied. The protester is hard to follow, but this corner seems to be here. Metro is this. If you were fooled, sorry, try watching it again, and this perspective. Well, obviously, people at home can't see the video.
Yeah. I'm not watching the video, man. Listen, y'all can go watch the video on
Of
your
course.
own.
Shall I continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think this clip is a good litmus. I think this clip is a good litmus test for whether you've sneaked into the auditorium without a permission slip, or whether you really are a progressive. If you really are a progressive, when you try to connect the clip above, which might well be staged, with the broad sweep of human history, you will think of Hitler or Mussolini, maybe even George W. Bush. Why? Because our protagonist is behaving exactly like them. His actions are tribal, territorial, and predatory. As one of our great Vulcan thinkers once put it, every 10 years or so, the United States needs to pick up some small, crappy little country and throw it against the wall, just to show the world we mean business. I'm sure the people who decided to invade Iraq had many goals, all of which they imagined entirely in benevolent terms. But I really have trouble believing that this wasn't at least one of them. If you sneaked in, who knows what you think? Something awful, I suspect. Kids, this presentation is not for you. Can't you just slink back to your slimy holes for once? Note to all, in case you ever find your nice, clean, progressive discussion forums overrun with Nazis, you can drive them away by making the Jew noise. Jew, Jew! It's better than the mosquito. In any case, thanks for participating in our first experimental test of URTV. More videos are not coming soon. Let's get back to these anomalies. We will continue by assuming two things about the null hypothesis. One is that it's basically true. Two is that any small ways in which it may be imperfect are a minor, B, A, minor, B, accidental, and C, either self-correlating or at least correctable. Since this is basically what progressives and most non-progressives believe, it is only fair to start with it. It's a pity, though, that is, it leaves us with these odd asymmetries. It is easy to note that progressives, as well as most non-progressives, express these mental adaptations. It is hard to understand why. It is especially true since progressive thought seems to lack any sort of theology, which can explain just about anything. Why are people with red hair and blue eyes evil? Because that's how Ball made them. So, our three anomalies have three things in common. One, progressives have explanations for all of them, but these explanations seem less than usually compelling. Two, these strained explanations are generally shared not just by progressives, but also by their enemies, the conservatives. And three, there is a single anti-progressive hypothesis, which is obviously on its own face wrong, or at to hurl his sartor resartus at his dinner companions, and seems to explain them all quite nicely with plenty of headroom left over. The hypothesis is that the international community, a phrase we see used on a pretty regular basis, although perhaps we are not quite as clear as we may be as to what exactly it may mean, it always has been a fundamentally predatory force. The fact that falsifies this hypothesis, at least for me, is that my father was a U.S. diplomat, and if the international community means anything, it must mean foggy bottom. And I can tell you that it or transy for an SS officer or vice versa. If the Third Reich is your image of an international predator, and why shouldn't it be really misapplied? As anyone who are genetically decent, intelligent, and well-meaning people. Moreover, this fact does not stop at the edges of government. By definition, decent, intelligent, and well-meaning people are not predatory, since the international community is clearly progressive. The hypothesis is falsified. Woo! But not endorsing this false hypothesis, but simply using it as a tool of argument, It sure is interesting to look at how nicely it explains our little anomalies. It may or may not be productive to replace these three poorly explained phenomena by one incorrect assumption, but at least it reduces the number of problems. Let's work through them one by one. First, what happened to the Third World? Well, that's pretty easy. It was conquered and devastated by the international community. Admittedly, the devastated part kind of sucks. But when you're a predator, it's better to conquer and to devastate than not to conquer at all. N'est-ce pas? Let's take a look at this independence thing. What exactly is a multilateral declaration of independence? Since it's not this. Well, on the sweet and good and true side, a multilateral declaration of independence seems to involve a change in the ethnicity of government officials. Foreign officials are replaced by native-born officials. Clearly, for example, it would be an outrage for true-born Americans to be governed by a dirty, no-good Mex. Oh, wait. We're progressives. We're not racists. Ethnicity means nothing to us. Well, the post-colonial regimes are no longer controlled from overseas. They can do whatever they want. They are free. Sure they are. They are so free that they've received $2.6 trillion in aid since 1960. Does the phrase, who pays the piper calls the tune, ring any bells? Again, in English at least, the word independence is a compound of the prefix in, meaning not, and dependent, meaning dependent.
All right.
And
Hang on a minute. Like yo, because I think that's worth discussing a little bit as far as stuff's really concerned, right? Like the mentality is like these countries, like they stand here and you would call like a third world country independent of other countries, but the truth of the matter is like they're still run by like multinational corporations or the UN or whatever mother country they were with beforehand. Like for instance, like France is still running most of those colonies in Africa that they have at this point. You know, Paulie. No, Paulie disappeared. Gotcha. All right.
No, I'm here, man. I was just busy. I apologize. What was the question?
Like yeah, like the international or like these third world countries, that claim to be independent aren't actually independent. Like they're still fully reliant upon, U.S. cash and cash from EU countries and China and whatever nation it may be.
Absolutely. If you say that Canada is a first world country, yep. There you go. There's a first world country that's under everything else.
Yeah,
Exactly. You said it. It's
but
not
really,
third world countries. It's also first world countries.
yeah, first world countries, like there's a bunch of them that are still run by other countries as far as stuff, actually really concerned, like Poland and, a lot of the Eastern Bloc countries, that, you would still call first, maybe second world countries, but they're still not truly independent because, a lot of their, actual
The
day to
name's
day
called
decisions are made by
Dominion.
somebody else.
All right. So the new name's called Dominion. They're not called uh the C word. What was the C word? Commissary? No.
Commissary,
No.
communist,
Eh, no. Commonwealth.
Commonwealth. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was making a joke about. Okay,
yeah.
so yeah, right. So it's the Dominion of Canada, Dominion of Australia, Dominion of Jamaica, or Jamaican Dominion.
Right, but they're
Uh,
supposed to be
yeah,
independent countries, but they truly actually aren't. In the end of the day,
yeah.
but
We
like
had this discussion the other day, and the Queen does have veto power. It's literally stronger than the president if she wanted to do it, and she could do it right across a couple countries.
yeah, You know what I mean? But again, you know what I'm saying? Like, I kind of like, I wanted to discuss that point because it's like, you know, I mean, a good point to kind of bring out when everybody thinks that these countries that, you know, we're like, oh man, you know, we're standing here, they gave their free, they have their freedom and all these type of things. Like, yo, they really don't at the end of the day, you know? Anyway,
No freedom.
yeah. So Giovanni, want to keep continuing, my brother?
Yes, sir,
Thank you, sir.
certainly. Anytime. And what does it mean for a government to be free anyway? Is the government of North Korea free? What about ExxonMobil or the Democratic Party? I have a fairly good understanding of what it means for a human being to be free. When it comes to an organization, especially one which claims to be a government, I'm quite without a clue. One test we can apply for independence, which should be pretty conclusive, is that structures of government in a genuinely independent country should tend to resemble the structures that existed before it was subjugated, rather than the structures of some other country on which it may happen to be dependent. These structures should be especially unlikely to resemble structures in other newly independent countries, with which it presumably has nothing in common. In other words, after 1960, the Third World became the Third World become more westernized or less westernized? Did it revert to its pre-Western political systems, rejecting the foreign tissue like a bad transplant? Or did it become a more and more slavish imitation of the West? There is exactly one region in which the former happened, the Persian Gulf. Not that the Gulf states are utterly unwesternized, but their political systems are clearly the least Western in the world. Oddly enough, the Gulf states also happen to be independent, in the good old financial sense of the word. There are also two exceptions in Africa, Somaliland, which fell through the cracks, and Botswana, which has diamonds. You will sometimes hear Botswana described as a model of African democracy. How fortunate the Botswanan people should be so wise as to elect as their first president none other than their hereditary monarchy. In practice, the place is more or less run by De Beers on the on the good old United Fruit model. Across most of the Third World, however, we see a very simple transition from the traditional forms of government and tribal leaders whom the British, level in the policy of indirect rule, to a new elite selected and educated in Western missions, schools, and universities. In Africa, these men are called the Wabenzi. Wa is the Swahili prefix for tribe, and I think the word Benzi speaks for itself. Moreover, the rhetoric of Thiers Mondisme is and was almost the same everywhere. If Algeria and Vietnam were truly growing up and following their own destinies, you might think the former would be ruled by a Dey, D-E-Y, and the latter by emperors and mandarins. You'd certainly be surprised to find that they both had an organization called the National Liberation Front. And finally, perhaps the subject sublest aspect of dependency is power dependency. To whom did the rash of fresh presidents, congresses, and liberation fronts owe its existence? Where exactly did Macmillan's wind of change blow from? For the matter, who cares about the people now? Why does a vast river of cash still flow from European and American taxpayers to these weird camo bedecked mirror shaded thugs? Well, one theory is that the brave liberation fronts seized power through their own military prowess, or the unquenchable anger of the people at foreign domination, which could be no longer repressed, or the fiery will of the workers, which blazed out far too often, or the shining light of education, which brought the dream of democracy to our little brown brothers. Or, I'm afraid Professor Frankfurt has taught us much on the subject. In fact, you'll see that in pretty much every case, including some that may surprise you, here's a great primary source. The liberation fronts achieved power because they had powerful friends. Sometimes the friends were in Paris, sometimes they were in London, sometimes they were even in Moscow. There's an excellent new film on the subject from Barbet Schroeder, the man who gave us General Idi Amin Dada's reality, and you gotta see it. Once again, if this is independence, I'm a three-eyed donkey. Note that the English language has a perfectly good word for a regime which appears to be independent, but in reality is quite dependent. It starts with P and rhymes with Muppet. In fact, perhaps Muppet is a good term for the post-1945 post-colonial regimes. A Muppet state is quite a puppet state. It delivers a far more lifelike impression of individual identity. It has not just an invisible hand supporting it from below, but invisible strings pulling it from above. In fact, Muppet states often appear quite hostile to their masters. There are a variety of reasons for this. One is internal conflict within the master state, which we'll get into in a bit. But the simplest is just camouflage. The classic story is de Gaulle's legendary Obstreperennus, uh, Obstreperennus during World War II, pardon me. De Gaulle had to cause problems for the British and Americans because his whole story was that he represented the true spirit of oppressed France, rather than just being some guy that Churchill set up in an office, which is, of course, exactly what he was. Furthermore, because a blatant display of puppetry would have been no use to the Allies, they had to tolerate his acting out. The phenomenon of dependent rebellion is quite familiar to anyone who has ever been a teenager. An analogy that's a good guide to the sort of independence we see in the likes of Mugabe or Castro or even Khomeini. Each a member of the I got the job through the New York Times Club. It's easy to see what a network of post-colonial Muppet states harnessed to the hegemonic will of an imperial alien overlord looks like. We have the perfect example, the Warsaw Pact, and its assorted flunkies in Africa and in Asia. In fact, we have two evil Muppet empires to look at, because the Maoists spun off their own. The Marxist-Leninist Muppet states all insisted fervently that they were liberated, independent, etc., and that their alliances were brotherly partnerships of equal, with their own politburos and everything. And of course, the whole enterprise was run by Comrade Brezhnev, from the white phone in his petit salon. Even Hitler's quislings in the New Order Europe, did not exhibit quite this level of gall. There was no pretense that Vichy France, for example, was an equal to the Third Reich. And since the Soviet and Western blocs often competed for the same set of Muppets, for example, Nasser, Tito, and even Ho Chi Minh, who never lost his popularity, in out of Langley, I'm afraid the pattern is really quite clear. So, from our counterfactual perspective, the story of the Third World is quite clear. In the second half of the 20th century, the Third World passed from its old colonial masters, the British, French, and Portuguese, who were certainly no angels, but were perhaps at least a little less brazen, to a new set of ruthless and cynical overlords. The Cold War powers whose propaganda skills were matched only by the devastation that their trained thugs unleashed. Under under the mendacious pretext of liberation, and independence, most remnants of non-European governing traditions were destroyed. Major continents such as Africa were reduced to the desolate slums ruled by corrupt, well-connected fat cats, of whose loot was straight from Western taxpayers and Swiss banks.
Yeah, like I'm gonna tell you what. I have a little brother who actually does missionary work over in Africa on a regular basis. He goes over to like Burkina Faso and builds wells, right? And when he goes over there and he builds these wells or whatever, and like when he leaves, he watches as these people dismantle them and take them and throw them into, like pulls the metal off of them and takes the metal and scraps it from stuff. And this is the end result of the Western powers basically staying after like World War II, sitting here basically trying to pass off these countries as like democracies. When the truth of the matter is, they don't have any of the institutions that would really allow them to be democracies when it comes down to it. And then on top of that, we've spoken about this 1,000 times on my channel, but the borders are completely ridiculous. Like they put all these individuals together who have no business living together. Like Iraq should be 3 different countries, Libya should be like 3 different countries, Syria should be 2 different countries, because the people inside of it, like there's no real institutions that are made up of individuals who really want to live together and actually work together and be a part of anything as far as things are really concerned.
Yeah, but Tom,
What up?
there's a reason why my country is inhospitable. All right, really big word, but yeah, 2% of my fucking landmass is less than 2% actually populated. 36, 37
Yeah,
million
90% of all Canadians live within 100 miles of the American
We're the
border.
second biggest country in the world or whatever. But anyway, we keep fighting with Russia over the fucking Arctic. They think they own more. We think we own more. Whatever. But anyway, yeah, like come to my country in the middle of winter in January. Let's go ice fishing and see if you can hang with me. No, no, no. If you're from Kenya, you're from fucking Middle East, India, China. I don't give a fuck where you're from. You ain't normalized to the cold and all that shit. I apologize. But you sitting at the fucking bus stop, freezing your fingers off because you don't know what you got into, or, right, it was a terrible situation. Poor
Yo,
guy walking
they're gonna
across.
run you in the comment section. Yo, legit, you are gonna get ran hard in the comment section.
But
Legit.
it's true though.
Yo,
These people don't know what they're getting into, and they walked across in the Northern Territories into Manitoba, and poor guy, man, he lost his fingers, his toes, his ears, and his nose.
I got you. You know what I'm saying? That, that doesn't apply at all to what we're reading. You know what I mean? But like, I feel where you are. You know,
Yeah, it can't. The people in Canada, yeah, like fucking, we're happy people.
Yo,
Country's not so nice. It's not us.
this
It's
is about
country.
international geopolitics, my
Cold.
friend. Legit, Canada,
It's cold.
Canada, Canada. Like, legitimately, like you should be thankful. America just really doesn't make you our hat, right? When it comes down to it, like you should be subjects of the American people. Like, yo, be thankful. We don't use you as a condom to
Subject
go
to
rape
you
Russia.
guys.
Anyway, yo, look, we're gonna keep going, all right, Paulie? Like, yo, legit, man, like, yo, because you're spouting nonsense. Giovanni, let's keep rocking, my brother.
Yes, sir. What's especially interesting is that when we step back, see a broad trend that does not reverse course at all in the 20th century. If anything, the 20th century is more of the same, only more so. We see 4 basic structures of government: native rule with private Western trade, native rule under the protection of chartered companies or other monopolies like the East India Trading Company, the British South Africa Company, or Anaconda Copper, etc. Classic nationalized colonialism with indirect rule, and the post-colonial Muppet states. Across all these stages, as time increases, we see the following trends. 1. The non-European world becomes culturally and politically westernized. 2. More and more Westerners are employed in the actual task of governing them. I don't know the ratio of aid workers today to colonial administrations 50 years ago, but I'm sure it's tremendous. And 3. The profits accruing to the West from all this activity dwindling away are replaced by massive losses. Aid is essentially a subsidy to the Muppet states, which are to the old chartered companies as a Lada factory is to a Honda factory. Who benefits from these trades? The international community, the vast army of international administrators who labor diligently and effectively at healing the great wounds they have torn into the side of the world. Who loses? Everyone else. Western taxpayers in the usual slow, relentless dribble, Africans and Asians in the gigantic revolutionary hemorrhage of civil war, poverty, corrupt government, and the collapse of medical care. If you read travel narratives of what is now the Third World from before World War II, I've just been enjoying Erna Ferguson's Guatemala, for example, you simply don't see anything like the misery, squalor, and barbarism that is everywhere today. Ferguson describes Guatemala City as clean. I kid you not. What you do see is a social and political structure, whether native or colonial, that are clearly not American in origin and that are unacceptable not only by modern American standards, but even by 1930s American standards. So, again, we have two theories of the international community. One, its own, depicts it as a savior and liberator of the planet and essentially global and universal in nature. Two, the one I've just developed shows it as a ravenous predator, the dominant player in a second scramble for Africa, with Asia and South America added to the plate. Essentially, a new version of the Delian League, with Washington in the parts of Athens. And neither makes sense. The first hypothesis is very hopeful and reassuring, and most people believe it. But it has three odd Orwellian ticks in the way that it uses English. And the second is, once again, quite counterfactual. I know these people. They are not all predatory. There is no denying the transitional bureaucrats have the world's best interest at heart, and they are certainly not in any way American nationalists. They simply do not remind me in any way, shape, or form of the corner man. So put this conundrum aside and move on to the second anomaly, nationalism. I hope it's not too much of a surprise that it turns out to be a special case of the first. Nationalist regimes and movements are good when they're doing God's work, i.e., their goal is to become nice, multilateral members of the international community. Nationalist regimes and movements are bad when they defy international opinion and turn against said community, which wants nothing other than to be able to love them as its beloved children. In other words, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Typical Machiavellian predatory behavior. It is always pleasant to depart from the bleak, mendacious 20th century and return to its predecessor, whose leaders could be just as unscrupulous, but who's dressed much better. There was an international community in the 19th century as well, and at least in the old world, it operated in test. The unification of Italy, good or bad? I'll bet you said good. Well, here's a little story. A couple of years ago, Mrs. Moldbug and I spent 3 weeks in Italy. For the first week, we split a if a bit buggy, and involved inhaling enormous quantities of limoncello. Next, we thought we'd take our backpacks and bop around on a train a little. Our first stop, Naples. I'm afraid it's not for Africa. Obviously, this is a racist statement, and I can't condone it. But even the Lonely Planet warns travelers, you might think you're in Cairo or Tangier. I have never been to Cairo or Tangier, but if they're anything like Naples, God help them. This 3,000-year-old city of Naples is reeking of garbage ridden sewer. This year, there was an actual garbage strike, but the problem is perennial. There was a giant, seemingly permanent mound of it right across the street from our LP recommended albergo. At all times, almost everyone on the street appears to be a criminal, especially at night. The streets are ruinous, unlit, and patrolled by thieves and mopeds. We saw one pull up in the front of an old lady carrying a bag of groceries, openly inspect goods for anything stealing, then sway. Apparently, they have a reputation for ripping earrings out of women's ears. From Napoli, you can take the train to Trans-Vesuviano to Pompeii. This train has a wonderful name, but its main purpose appears to be transporting criminals from the Stalinist banlieues in which they live to the city in which they steal. Signs are everywhere, in every language, known to humanity to warn tourists that pickpockets are everywhere. The trains are stripped to the metal and covered with graffiti, which is not in Latin. As the train stopped at one station, we saw a couple of carabinieri carrying a body bag away from the platform. The night after we wandered into the historic district of Napoli, simply looking for an open-air cafe in which to sit and chat. Eventually, we found one. We were pretty much the only people there. It was Saturday night. We moved on and discussed one clean thing in Naples, the new EU-funded subway. Tried a couple of stops. Everything was the same. Finally, I remembered a snarky little use of the word bourgeois in the planet and marched Mrs. Moldbug over to the funicula, which goes up to the hill to the Vomero, a sort of internal suburb. Quelle differenze. You go 300 feet up a cliff, and you go from Cairo to Milan. We immediately found a wine bar with an English-speaking hostess and enjoyed several lovely glasses. Suddenly, we realized that it was late, and we didn't know when the subway stopped running. To get us back to our albergo near the Stazione Centrale, so we asked, and no one knew. Not the waitress, not anyone at the bar. These hip young people had no idea of the subway hours in their own city. I believe the waitress actually said something like, "Why do you want to go there?" We hurried, and I think we got the last train. The next day, Mrs. Moldbug, who is far more tasteful than I, who would never repeat their nasty line about Garibaldi, expressed the desire to just hop on the Eurostar and stay on it until we get to Stockholm. In fact, we ended up in Perugia, which, of course, was lovely. So, Napoli, or Naples, obviously Naples being this way, I assumed that Naples had always been this way. There was that old line, see Naples and die. But presumably it referred to a knife in the ribs. That poor bastard on the Trans-Vesuviano had seen Naples and died. Was it worth it? So I was surprised to discover a different version of reality from British historian Desmond Seward's Naples, a Traveller's Companion.
Yo, and
Quote,
by the way, I actually have family back in Naples, like right now. Just wanted to put that out there at the moment. You know what I'm saying? We can keep rocking though.
quote, In size and number of inhabitants, she ranked as the third city of Europe, and from her situation and superb show may justly be considered the Queen of the Mediterranean, wrote John Chetwood Eustace in 1813. Until 1860, Naples was the political and administrative center of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, the most beautiful kingdom in the world, consisting of southern Italy and Sicily. It had a landmass equal to that of Portugal, and was the richest state in Europe. For 5 generations, from 1734 till 1860, monarchy who filled the city with monuments to their reign. The Borboni, as their subjects called them, were complete Neapolitans, wholly assimilated, who spoke and thought in Neapolitan dialect. Indeed, the entire court spoke Neapolitan. Until 1860, glittering court balls and regal gala nights at the San Carlo, which staggered foreigners by their opulence and splendor, were a feature of Neapolitan life. In 1839, the ferocious Whig Lord Macaulay was staying in the city and wrote, I must say that the accounts which have I heard in Naples are very incorrect. There is far less beggary than in Rome, and far more industry. At present, my impressions are very favorable to Naples. It is the only place in Italy that has seemed to me to have the same sort of vitality which you find in all the great English ports and cities. Rome and Pisa are dead and gone. Florence is not dead, but sleepeth, while Naples overflows with life. The Borboni memory has systematically blackened by partisans of the regime which supplanted them and by admirers of the Risorgimento. They have had a particularly bad press in the Anglo-Saxon world. 19th century English liberals loathed them for their absolutism, their clericalism, and their loyalty to the papacy, their opposition to the fashionable cause of Italian unity. Politicians from Lord William Betnick to Lord Palmerston and Gladstone, writers such as tyrants. Gladstone convinced himself that their regime was the negation of God. Such critics as prejudiced economic achievement. The kingdom, the inhabitants' relative contentment, the fact that only a mere handful of southern Italians were opposed to their government till the end, the Two Sicilies was remarkable for the majority of its subjects' respect for and knowledge of its laws. So deep that even today probably most Italian judges, and especially successful advocates, still come from the South. Yet even now there is a mass of blind prejudice among historians. All too many guidebooks dismiss the Borboni as corrupt despots who misruled and neglected their capital. An entire curtain of slander conceals the old pre-1860 Naples. With the passage of time, calumny
Calumny.
has been
It's calumny. It's
uh,
actually it
cal-
used to be a criminal charge back in the day. Calumny was the news misleading the people.
ah, calumny has been supplanted by ignorance, and it is easy to forget that history is written by the victors. However, Sir Harold Acton, in the two splendid studies of the Borboni, has to some extent redressed the balance, and his interpretation of past events is winning over increasing support, especially in Naples itself. Undoubtedly, the old monarchy had serious failings. Though economically and industrially creative, it was also absolutist and isolationist, disastrously out of touch with pan-Italian aspirations. Beyond the question, there was political repression. Under the Bourbons, the dynasty was fighting for its survival, but it has been magnified out of all proportion. On the whole, prison conditions were on the whole, prison conditions were probably no worse than in contemporary England, which still had its hulks. What really upset Gladstone was seeing his social equals being treated in the same way as working-class convicts, since opposition to the regime was restricted to a few liberal romantics among the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie. The Risorgimento was a disaster for Naples and for the South in general. Before 1860, the Mezzogiorno was the richest part of Italy outside the Austrian Empire. After it quickly became the poorest. The fact the facts speak for themselves. In 1859, money circulating in the two Sicilies amounted to more than the circulating in all other independent Italian states, while the Bank of Naples gold reserves were 443 million gold lire, twice that twice the combined reserves of the rest of Italy. The gold was immediately confiscated by Piemonte, whose own reserve had been a mere 27 million, and transferred to Turin. Neapolitans excise duties levied to keep out of the North's inferior goods and providing four-fifths of the city's revenue were abolished. And then the Northerners imposed crushing new taxes. Far from being liberators, the Piemontese administrations, who had came in the wake of the Risorgimento, behaved like Yankees in the post-bellum southern states. They ruled the two Sicilies as an occupied country, systematically demolishing its institutions and industries. Ferdinand's new dockyard was dismantled to stop Naples competing with Genoa. It is now being restored by industrial archaeologists. Vilification of the Borboni became part of the school curriculum. Shortly after the two Sicilies enforced incorporation into the new Kingdom of Italy, the Duke of Maddaloni protested in the national parliament. This is invasion, not annexation, not union. We are being plundered like an occupied country. For years after the liberation, Neapolitans were governed by northern padroni and carpetbaggers. And today, the Italians of the North can be as stupidly prejudiced about Naples as any Anglo-Saxon, affecting a superiority which verges on racism. Africa begins south of Rome, and lamenting the presence in the north of so many workers from the Mezzogiorno. The ill feeling is reciprocated, the Neapolitan translation of SPQR being sono. Over 150,000 troops were needed to hold down the South.
Yo, man, Giovanni, you're a Guinea, right?
Excuse me?
You're an Italian, right?
Sì, signore, io parlare l'italiano bene.
Yeah. Sono Italiano, right?
Wait, I
Exactly.
thought that was computer. I thought that was a computer voice.
Yeah, no, it's an actual dude, right? That's why I wanted them to read this, right? You know, what I mean, like, so, like, the mentality is like a lot of us aren't told about our history as a whole, right? You know, what I mean, like, I'm assuming this is kind of like a learning experience for you as it is for me,
Absolutely.
right? You know what I mean? And like, I kind of like these things. Actually, I break down on my channel. I have a book. I have a playlist of Machiavelli's The Art of War, which nobody even has any idea was written, right? But it's beautiful. It's a dialogue between. It's basically like the present being able to question the past. It's a Florentian general being questioned by a young Florentian noble about the practices and reasons and logistics of why things are run in the country the way they are as far as war is concerned, right? And I always find that to be a beautiful thing to find out, like, kind of about my culture and like what's going on. You know what I mean? That's kind of my mentality as far as like stuff's concerned. You know what I mean? So like that's like again, you know what I mean, like it's kind of one of the reasons why I chose this chapter too, because it got into like some of our stuff. So I figured you'd probably enjoy it a little bit more.
Absolutely. Now, if she's mistaking me for a computer, that says something negative about my speaking skills.
It doesn't. It doesn't. I'll be honest. I've been sitting here reading this text with you, right? And I've watched you correct 3 or 4 things. It's fucking beautiful to watch you do it. It's amazing, right? And actually hearing you
Wait,
like pronounce
no, I
stuff
thought
right? What up?
it sounds like really good, and I like your voice.
Thank you.
That was my mentality, right? I was like, I love this voice. It's fucking awesome. You know what I mean? So, all right. Anyway, right? Let's.
It's very vintage.
Yo, I got about 12 minutes left with you, my brother. Let's you know what I mean, see where we get to. You know what I mean, and we'll finish it up. End this up, and you know what I mean, upload this to YouTube, and I'll send you a link to it so you can you know what I mean, have it for yourself. All right. Maybe we can do this again like next week or later on this week. What do you think?
Absolutely.
All right, man. Let's keep rocking.
Alrighty. Note the pattern. What made Italian unification happen? Why did Ferdinand of Naples, with his 443 million gold lire, just roll over for Charles Albert of Piemonte, with his mere 27? 2 reasons. Lord Palmerston define their backers. Not in Pompeii, that's for sure. The unification of Italy was an event in the 19th century's great struggle between liberalism and reaction. The international liberal movement of the 20th century, in which a figure such as Karl Schurz could go from German revolutionary in 1848 to Civil War general in 1861, was the clear precursor of today's international community. And once again, we see it playing the same predatory role, conquering and destroying in the name of liberation and independence. Unless you count the American Revolution, perhaps the first and clearest case of this strange phenomena, multilateral independence, was the Greek War of Independence. As Lawiki, without a trace of irony, puts it, quote, along a long and bloody struggle, and with the aid of the great powers, independence was finally granted by the Treaty of Constantinople in July 1832. Close quote. Indeed, and if we look at the citizens of said great powers, principally, of course, Great Britain, who gave us Greek independence, we see the same type of people who were behind Mazzini, Schurz, and all the way down to today's international community. Liberals, radicals, thinkers, artists, progressives. Lord Byron is one. Lord Byron is, of course, the archetype. Again, these are the best and nicest people in the world, now or then. So why in the world do they always seem to turn up in the same breath as phrases like long and bloody struggle? So we have not solved the anomaly of nationalism, but at least we have reduced it to the same problem as our first anomaly, which has to be something. What happened to the third world? It was devoured by predatory, cynical, bogus nationalism. Why would educated, cosmopolitan, and civilized thinkers support predatory, cynical, bogus nationalism? Again, we hit the wall. Let's move on to the third problem, Hitler. Of course, I hold no brief for Hitler Jew Jew. The anomaly to reprise is that Hitler today is detested for his human rights violations, i.e., the Holocaust, and the Allies are therefore revered for defeating Hitler, wrapping the whole problem up in a neat little bow. The only problem is, with this human rights theory of the World War II, is that it has no resemblance to reality. First, the Allies included a fellow whose human rights record was at least as bad as Hitler's. Second, Roosevelt and Churchill not only didn't seem to mind the extermination of the Jews, whom they had many opportunities to save, if anything, they covered it up. which makes neo-Nazi claims that the Holocaust was Allied war propaganda grimly comical, to say the least. And third, the Allies didn't at all mind barbecuing as many enemy civilians as they could fit on the grill. Put these facts together, and the human rights theory of World War II makes about as much sense as the suggestion that Caesar invaded Britain because he wanted to see Manchester United play Chelsea. So why did it happen? The nominal cause of the European war was that Britain wanted to preserve a free Poland. You'd think that if this was their key goal, they would have found a way to come out of the war with a free Poland, especially having won and all. Much the same can be said with respect to the US and China. Note that what we are interested in here is not the motives of Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo. These men are dead, and so are their movements. The movements that defeated them, however, live on. I think it's pretty clear that the international community and the Allies are one and the same. Our question is why said community had such a harsh reaction to Nazi Germany, especially since its response to Soviet Russia, which was just as aggressive and just as murderous, was so different. One simple answer, continuing our counterfactual, was that the fascist movements was a competitor predator, excuse me, a Nazis for the same reason that a lion will kill a leopard if it gets the chance. Not because leopards are all good to eat, but because there are only so many. Waters here are freshly muddied by Johann fascism left-wing movement. Erich von Ledin, a far right, excuse me, a far better writer, made the case far earlier and far more eruditely. He was still wrong. As a reactionary Jacobite myself, I feel it's especially important to face up to the basically reactionary nature of the fascist movement. Fascism and Nazism were certainly creatures of the democratic era. Nothing like them could have been imagined in the 19th century. They certainly borrowed many techniques of government from both liberals and Bolsheviks, and the experience of living in a totalitarian state does not much depend on whether the state is communist, fascist, Buddhist, or Scientologist. Nonetheless, Goldberg is wrong. There is a fundamental difference. In 19 in the 1930s, there was no confusion at all as to whether the fascist movements were parties of the extreme right or the extreme left. Everyone agreed they were parties of the right. Populist right-wingers, to be sure, but right-wingers nonetheless. For once, the conventional wisdom is perfectly accurate. For example, in 1930, Francesco Nitti, nephew of Liberal Prime Minister by the same name, published a book called Escape, about his escape from internal exile on an Italian island. Let's just say that it wasn't exactly the gulag. In the preface, in the preface, his uncle, the PM, explains Mussolini for the English-speaking reader. Quote, Mussolini represents a medieval adventure in Italy. Until some 15 years ago, communist and anarchist, he defended regicide, anarchist crime, political assassination. He was written and predicted individual revolt. He has always considered all religions, these are his very words, like opium, to lull people to sleep. He has written and repeated for 20 years in his discourses that the abyss between capitalism and the proletariat should be filled with the heads of the capitalists. Again, in the year 1920, he incited the workmen to occupy factories and to pilfer. In 1914, he laughed at the Belgian occupation and urged the Italians to rebel against those who wanted to drag them into war. Close quote. Which all sounds very well for Goldberg's thesis, but wait, quote, Not having succeeded in making a red revolution, he attempted a white reaction, taking advantage of the discontent after the war. He succeeded with the help of a few generals and part of the army who wanted reaction. Becoming dictator, Mussolini has not only for, forswore all his past, but has introduced the most terrible reaction. All forms of liberty have been suppressed, press liberty, association liberty, reunion liberty. Members of parliament are practically nominated by the government. All political associations have been dissolved. Close quote. For those not vested in the color symbolism of the 19th century, Europe, white is the color of reaction, just as red is the color of revolution. Thus, Nitti is telling us, unlike the old socialist Mussolini, the new fascist Mussolini is a reactionary, just like the Borboni. As we've seen, if the international community is a predator, reactionaries are its prey. So, while the Soviets might be seen as a competing predator, fascism is something quite different. Fascism is a species of prey that, unlike the Borboni, decided to fight back, and it was not exactly adverse to fighting dirty. Here is my perception of fascism. It was a reactionary movement that combined the worst ideas of the Ancien Regime, the worst politics of the Democrats, and the worst tyrannies of the Bolsheviks. And what was the result? It was every bit as vanished as the Borboni, for a reactionary fascism is more or less a short course in what not to do.
All right, all right, all right. Since I got you for about a minute, actually about like a minute and like 7 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2. Well, let's stand here and let me stand here and let me knock some of this out. Fascism in Italy.
I will, before you go on, I will say right here and now that I strongly disagree with much of what has been said, but again, I'm just the narrator.
No. You are absolute doof. That hell with that, man. Like, yo, you're part of the video. Like, dude, explain to me why you think like it's wrong.
Because the individual whom is speaking doesn't understand the concept of the third position, and they clearly don't understand fascist philosophy. They aren't aware of the literature or the point of view by which the third position is approaching the matter. But that's a subject for another time.
Are you out of steam at the moment? Is that where you're at right now?
No. I just wanted to give you some time to say.
No. Please, man. Like, explain to me how he's wrong on the third position.
Because he's attempting to shoehorn fascism into a box that it does not fit within, politically and economically. The third position is something that transcends left and right. It's very easy for others to say, "Oh, fascism is a right-wing ideology," but that's not true, and that's not true because there is so much of what we would think of as enough leftism to it that it becomes an anomalous hot potato. Like myself, when I lived in another part of the country and there were practically no other Italians. I say this jokingly, but when I lived in Ohio, everybody used to look at me and ask, "Where are you from? Are you Puerto Rican? Are you Mexican?" No.
Yeah. I get Puerto Rican all the time.
I would, of course, have to tell them, "No, I'm Italiano." But why would people make that mistake? Because they're unfamiliar with who I am. And I know that's a rough example, but in a world where everyone is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed German in Ohio, or they were, of course, black, something that's different is difficult to associate. And so the writer here is clearly unfamiliar with third position literature. But again, I ask you, what were you going to say?
Well, no. I mean, I like this discussion right here that we're having at the moment. You know, because I see fascism as a newly born monarch. Right. I think it's a pejorative for a newly born monarch. Right. So the mentality is that almost all of fascism is basically an individual trying to form a principality inside of a country, and it basically becomes a like, and this is why, like, you can't like stand here and like put a finger on what fascism is, right? Because you have Italian fascism, German fascism, fascism in Central America, right? And each of these fascists have their own way of doing things, but fascism is nothing more than a pejorative of just a newly born principality at the end of the day. And I think that's where the writer's coming from with this, because like he stated it in a lot of his other works, that's basically what it is, right? And this is why, like he's saying, like the nationalist ideology is the ideology of monarchy. What do you think?
How much of this art? I'm trying to look to see how much of this article is left. I'll tell you what, my friend. Just for you, since we're so close to the end, I will happily finish the article just for you.
Oh well, I'm saying, like, we can finish it up, like, mark where we are and finish it up later. But this conversation is beautiful. Like I'd love to hear you stand here and like actually like teach me something new that I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, because that's what I'm here to do.
Certainly. Would you care for if I continued?
If you want to continue on the article, you can. But like I would love for you like to continue, like explain to me like the third position of fascism is like like why you would see it as being different.
The third position as a word is nothing more than a phrase used to bring something into a level of comprehensibility, because we are so used to dealing with left and right as the only spectrum, and we've attempted to in recent days expand it out to so-called authoritarianism versus libertarianism, but even that is an inadequate chart for attempting to place this, because the third position sees itself as something that transcends that, it transcends that understanding, because it's not based on the same diagram, and the diagram that both left and right are based upon is materialism, whereas the third position is not based on materialism, it's based on spiritualism or tribalism. Now, many
all right,
third
all right.
positions.
So let me put this right. Let me put this
Yes.
out here like this, because we spoke on this last week. I wish you would have came in for part of the live stream last week that we actually did inside of the rhetoric server. Basically, the principles are there's three different forms of government. There's Vox Populi, Vox Dei, right? There's Luxus Populi, Suprema Lex, right? And then there's Salus Populi, Suprema Lex, right? Which means that the voice of people or the voice of God, the voice of the luxury of the people is the supreme law, and then the health of the people is the supreme law, right? And so basically, I think what you're getting down to is the third position is more of a Salus Populi, Suprema Lex, which is the health of the people is what's utmost, right?
That would be a fair assessment, although perhaps a very simple one.
I'm trying to boil it down to its essence. Because
Yes.
the health can be seen as like the spirituality, the cultural health. The health of your citizenry. The family of your citizenry. Any of these things would apply to that.
A very wise and poignant point of view, yes. And I tip my hat to you. That was a very wise detail that you pointed.
I might sound retarded, but believe me, man, I come from royalty in Calabria.
Member of the Borboni.
No, not them, but somebody else, right? But like still, like my family had to go through Brazil to get here because they were actually intelligence for fucking Mussolini during World War II.
Apparently I had some family who were cooks during that time for high-ranking members of the government.
Yeah, mine were translators, right? And they couldn't come in, right? Because my family already had shops and businesses in like Caracas and Rio de Janeiro, right? Yeah, we were already traders before we got here, And so when we got here, like my great grandfather, he actually heard that like the streets of America were lined with gold. He had a plan to like go and scrape it off the fucking curbs and shit.
Clever. I like that. A regular Wizard of Oz.
He took it literally, but he got here, he had to work, but we made our way.
Silent.
Yeah, we made our way, but yeah, the mentality is that like I think when you talk about fascism, it's not a real thing, right? I think it's fugazi. It's a complete and utter bullshit term, right? It's not.
Fugazi, you used the word. My family uses that same word.
Yeah, I think all of ours do. You know what I mean, right? And like you stand here and you look at it, it's not a real thing at all. I don't think it's an actual term. I think it's a term for anybody who wants to lead a country that's not democratic.
Well, then we'd have a lot of different people with all of their as communists.
Well, communists are still democratic.
Or they may claim to be. Stalin sure as hell wasn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, like he was dictator for life, but like they still claim to be, I mean, a democratic society. They claim to be, what's the word I'm looking for here?
The People's Republic.
Egalitarian, right? That's what they claim to be, right? But they weren't. I mean, the end of the day. So when when it comes down to it, I mean, like fascism is basically an anti-egalitarian ideology, right? And that's why they get upset about the fact that like, oh man, like I'm not dealing, like they're not, when you go as a statesman to go talk to a king, I mean, you're not the king, I mean, you're just a politician from another country. You're nothing more. You're probably below the individuals who actually live there, because you have less of a stake in that country than the citizens of that country, than the subjects of that country when it comes down to it.
Mm.
You know, And that's the mentality that I mean, like, and this dude here, like, he's a Jacobite, which means like he wants to, he's a monarchist in the end of the day, right? So, and anybody who would want to be a monarchist in the modern day would be a fascist.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but nevertheless, I would like to continue on with this article,
Oh, for
if I
sure,
may.
for sure. Please go ahead, man.
Even a lifetime later, our emotional responses to fascism and Nazism make these concepts very difficult to handle. Full disclosure, my grandfather, a Jewish communist, enlisted in the U.S. Army to kill Nazis, and I'm pretty sure he bagged a few. One way to step away from these associations is to look not to the Third Reich, but at the Second, the strange regime of Kaiser Bill and the war he made. A less loaded name for fascism might be neo-militarism. The ideology of Wilhelmine Germany was generally described as militarism, a perfectly accurate description. It was certainly reactionary and also quite populist for a monarchy. World War I was extremely popular in Germany, as in all countries. Under the Kaiser, the highest social status available was conferred by military rank. You might be a distinguished was low or worse, non-existent. No one would talk to you at parties. Even for Americans who know something of the military, it's almost impossible to imagine living in a true militaristic society. Why did the last survivors of the Ancien regime become so aggressive and militaristic? Why, for example, did the German military jump at the opportunity to start a war in 1914? Because they believed, our counterfactual, that the international community was a killer with fangs. The German theory in 1914 was that the British alliance with France and Russia was designed to encircle Germany. Not exactly implausible, if one glances at a map. And we have already seen how the British dealt with reactionaries when they got the chance. The theory of the German General Staff in 1914 was that Germany, surrounded and besieged, had to attack or it would be gradually choked to death. This bit of Nazi propaganda in 1939 explains the German militarist theory of modern history quite well. Quote, "The deepest roots of this war are in England's old claim to rule the world, and Europe in particular. Although its homeland is relatively small, England has understood how to cleverly exploit others to expand its possessions. It controls the seas, the import points along major sea routes. and the richest parts of our planet. The contrast between England itself and its overseas territories is so grotesque that England has always has a certain inferiority complex with respect to the European continent. Whenever a continental power reached a certain strength, England believed itself and its empire to be threatened. Every continental flowering made England nervous. Every attempt at growth by nations wanting their place in the sun led England to take on the policeman's role. One must understand this to make sense of England's Germany policy from Bismarck to our day now. England was not happy with the results of the war from 1870 to 1871. British sympathies were already on France's side, since for the previous 100 years it had never had the same fear of France as it had for Germany. France had secured its own colonial empire, and its shrinking biological strength left enough room for expansion within its own natural boundaries. Things were different in Germany. England knew that the German people were strong when they had good leadership, and that the nature had given them limited, resource poor territory with a limited coast. Great Britain kept an eye on Germany, all the more whenever Germany expressed its strength, even in the most natural ways. The Second Reich experienced England's balance of power policy. We know that England did not want a true balance of power. It wants a situation in which England is always in a position, with the help of its allies, to have its way with a minority of confident, forward-moving nations. Close quote. Obviously, this is propaganda, but one bit of real history that I can recommend to anyone is the viewpoint of the fellow on the other side of the encirclement. If you've ever wondered who said, quote, "The lights are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime," close quote. Readable. Indeed, just why we have not seen the lamps lit again. There is simply no individual of Gray's caliber, politician or civil servant in the whole government racket these days. Needless to say, to Lord Grey writing after the war, no one would ever dream of trying to encircle Germany. Rather, the German militarists are paranoid and jingoistic, constantly trying to enhance their domestic political position by triggering European crises. And indeed, the pot that boiled over at Sarajevo was by no means the first such crisis. Agadir is a fine example. The British, on the other hand, are simply doing their best to keep the peace. At the end, in the end, they failed. Germany attacked Belgium without provocation, and the British honor bound to her response. I find Grey credible, completely credible. I have no reservations about his sincerity. He certainly strikes me as a more trustworthy character than the slippery Palmerston, who really was a bit of a snake, and his summary of the causes of the war is peerless. After 1870, Germany had no reason to be afraid, but she fortified herself with armaments and the Triple Alliance in order that she might never have reason to be afraid in the future. France, naturally, was afraid after 1870, and she made her military preparation and the dual alliance with Russia. Britain, with a very small army, had a very large empire, became first uncomfortable, and then, particularly when Germany began a big fleet program, afraid of isolation. She made the Anglo-Japanese alliance, made up her quarrels with France and Russia, and entered the Entente. Finally, Germany became afraid that she would presently be afraid, and struck the blow. While she believed her power to be invincible, Heaven alone knows the whole truth about human affairs, and I believe the above sketch to be as near to the truth, as near to a true statement of the causes of war as an ordinary intelligence can get in a few sentences. And with that, my friend, I'm a little out of steam for tonight.
All right, my brother.
I need to go to sleep. However, I have enjoyed this opportunity, and I very much would love to speak to you one-on-one and off the record when we have the chance, especially
for
as
sure.
a fellow Italiano.
Hey, man, look, I'll be honest with you. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm always down and, I'm always around. So anytime you want to hit me up, you know what I mean? I'm usually up, you know what I mean, at late night, and I'll sit and have conversations with you forever about, our culture and everything that goes with it. You know what I mean?
Perfect, Tom. When will we have the link to that?
Give me about an hour, man. I gotta upload everything. You know how that works, man. It takes forever, and then the processing checks and everything.
Wonderful. I've friend requested you, my friend.
All right, sir. I will accept it here in a second, man. Let me get over here and upload everything and do what I got to do. All right. Thank you, sir. It's appreciated. This is Giovanni Dark, everybody. You know what I'm saying? I'll find a way to be able to get you get a link for you to be able to get a hold of you if they want.
Absolutely.
All right, boss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
With Pnoid News. Man, like, share, and subscribe, everybody. You'll know how this works. Hit that notification bell and make sure, you know what I'm saying, you hit all. It is what it is. I'm going to get out of here. Peace be like one, everyone. Later.